Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow philanthropy enthusiasts, it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to On Giving, incisive commentary and analysis at the intersection of philanthropy and the greater good. I'm Liz Knuppel, President and CEO of Skystone Partners, where we believe philanthropy is a powerful force for good. And today, we have the honor of being joined by an esteemed guest whose experience and insights have made a significant impact on the world of fundraising and philanthropy. Allow me to introduce to you Lois Buntz, CFRE. Hi, Lois.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello,
Liz.
hello. Lois is a distinguished public speaker, author, veteran fundraiser, and nonprofit consultant. With a wealth of experience spanning strategic planning, fund development, services, and women's philanthropy initiatives, Lois brings a unique perspective to our discussion about women in philanthropy today. So prior to Lois's consulting career, she served as the CEO of a mid-sized United Way, where she spearheaded multiple campaigns, raising over $125 million for various causes. Her dedication to the field of philanthropy has also been evident through her role as an adjunct faculty member at the University of Iowa Graduate School of Social Work and her tenure as an assistant professor at Clark University in Dubuque, Iowa. In addition to her impressive professional achievements, Lois is deeply committed to empowering women and advancing causes of social justice. Her consultancy work extends to organizations like Women Strong and International Women's Organization, providing vital services in Africa, South America, and India. Beyond her professional pursuits, Lois finds joy and fulfillment in the company of her husband, Bob, with whom she enjoys bicycling, golfing, and traveling. And together they cherish their time with their 4 adult children and 6 grandchildren. But for today's conversation, we have the privilege of delving into Lois's latest endeavor with her insightful book, which we have right over here, Generosity and Gender, Philanthropic Models for Women Donors and the Fund Development Professionals Who Support Them, which explores the intricate dynamics of women's philanthropy and its profound impact on shaping our world. It's also this year's AFP Skystone Partners Prize for Research winning book. So with Lois's guidance, we'll embark on a journey through the key themes and insights from her book, gaining valuable knowledge and inspiration along the way. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Lois Buntz as we embark on this enriching discussion in women's philanthropy and the power of giving back. Hi, Lois.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. Now, I want to dive right into our interview. I have like one little housekeeping bit that I want to make sure folks are aware of. We're going to have questions and answers. Lois has a wealth of advice, of knowledge, of insights. So we want to make sure you all have an opportunity to ask her your questions. The chat feature that you have said hello in at the beginning of the webcast is now turned off. If you would please enter any of your questions into the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen. Adrian Taylor, Senior Consultant with Skystone Partners, is monitoring and curating those questions so that we can get the most concise, best bang for the buck, so that we get all of your questions without duplications. So back to you, Lois. I'm curious. We had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I'd love it if you would share with our audience members your motivation or your background for writing Gender and Generosity. What inspired you to dive into this topic?
Well, my work at United Way certainly was a moving force in terms of my interest in women's philanthropy. We had initiated a women's giving group at United Way when I was there. It's now called Women United. It's a national organization within United Ways. And myself, our staff, and inspiring group of women donors got together and decided to start a leadership program in United Way when I was there. And it really piqued my interest about how women think about philanthropy and do we do it differently? And so after my, I guess I would call semi-retirement, because I went into consulting work from United Way, I decided that I wanted to talk to women more, collect their stories, and really find out more about what motivates them.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So it was really from that firsthand boots on the ground experience of observing women, working with women. And so, all of that interest led you eventually to writing the book. Can you maybe give us a brief overview of some of the themes, some of the stories or things that you discovered along the way? One of the things that I really was I think that caught my attention was the three historical waves of women's philanthropy, but I certainly don't want to restrict you to just that piece. But can you talk a little bit about the themes and your research?
Sure. It really began with stories, collecting
Hmm.
stories. And as researchers do, I had kind of a formalized process. And when I talked to women, interviewed them and recorded them. But then I really discovered that I needed to learn more about women's philanthropy. How did it develop?
Hmm.
What do we really know about it? And that led me into some of the historical research of how women's philanthropy actually began and where we are today as a result of it. Certainly, some major themes that developed in the book were not only historically are we at a new phase in women's development and philanthropy, but women have a huge capacity to give. And I think wealth managers, fundraisers, everybody's been talking about this. But for women specifically, I think I've seen reports that U.S. women have the ability to give $230 billion annually if we really all
If we all
chipped in.
went all in.
Yeah, if we all went in and did what we wanted to do. And so the capacity of women's wealth is growing, and I think many markets are looking at that. So that was definitely one of the themes. Another theme was that now, because of the great research of the Women's Philanthropy Institute at Lilly Family School of
Mhm.
Philanthropy, we know a lot about how women give because we have hard data, statistical evidence that backs up the stories and anecdotes that all of us who work in philanthropy heard and maybe knew, but we couldn't quite put the two together.
Right. Right. Excellent. Excellent. So we've got hard data, historical perspective, hard data from the Women's Philanthropy Institute, and we're learning every day how women are giving and that we have a tremendous amount of power if we women, and I know we're speaking to both women and men today, but if we women decide to tap into it. One of the things that I really loved in the book and talking with you about was when you gave me that historical context of like the first wave of women's philanthropy came along with the right to vote and political advocacy.
Right.
And there were some themes that we talked about how women have led social movements through their philanthropy. And I'm curious if you could maybe give a little bit of context to our audience today about some of those common themes in the first and the second and the third wave of women's philanthropy.
Right. Yeah, that was really, for me, a very interesting part of the book when I looked at the history first and then, moved forward to current day.
Mhm.
And but there was a little debate actually with one of my editors about whether we should put in the history or not. And I said, no, I think it's really important because it gives the context.
Right.
So one of my themes in the book, one of my philosophies was that because we've had these three historical waves, the first being in the suffrage movement,
Mhm.
so late 1800s into the early 1900s, where women got the right to vote. But the reason behind a lot of their success was that they tapped into women who had money. And
Mhm.
of course, at that time in history, a lot of women didn't own their own money because once they got married, their husbands owned their money. So women came together and because of their philanthropy could do marketing and marches and all the things that helped get the right to vote passed in 1920. And then the next phase I really looked at was the probably 1960s to 1980s into the
Mhm.
early 90s when the women's rights movement, civil rights, we had a lot of this social revolution going on in our country. And one of the things that happened is women started looking at how much money actually went to women and girls programs.
Mm.
And less than 1% of all philanthropy was going to programs for women and girls. And so women said, well, enough of that. We have to take care of ourselves, I guess.
Right. Right.
And so that's when, many of the women's foundations developed.
Mhm.
We had women who really started programs specifically for women's philanthropy, and women's giving increased. So that was kind of the second wave. And then
Mhm.
the third wave hasn't been identified as distinctly, but in my opinion, it was when women really stepped up.
Mhm.
And in about 2005, even though major universities and hospitals, healthcare institutions had been tapping mega donors, um, Women Moving Millions
Mhm.
developed during that
Yeah.
period of time. Helen
Was
LaKelly Hunt,
Yep.
yeah, and their campaign to raise $150 million actually raised $180 million. So
Yeah.
they said women have capacity,
Right.
and I think it really proved that women could be mega donors. And
Mhm.
now I believe that because women are more engaged in philanthropy, because we have much higher capacity because of our earning power and what I call the dual wealth transfer, which we many of us are going to inherit from our parents, and because women outlive men, and if you're in a more traditional relationship, women may outlive their spouse, they're going
Mhm.
to inherit a second time. So we have earning power, dual health, wealth transfer. um, Women are going to have more capacity to give.
Right.
And so I believe that both from a capacity standpoint and the fact that we have people like Mackenzie Scott stepping up
Yeah.
and really showing the philanthropy world what women can do,
Yeah.
that we're going to see this new wave of women giving.
Yeah.
And it's going to be pretty impressive.
It's yeah, I would tend to agree. It sounds like it. And I don't think I had ever thought of it in the terms, or haven't stated it in such simple terms as the dual wealth transfer. I love
Mhm.
that concept, and I really appreciate you putting it so succinctly, because that is tremendous as well, because women very often do outlive their husbands. And so
Right.
that's important to keep in mind. One of the things that I'm curious about some of the stories, and I want to make sure that we don't miss out on either your most memorable or your favorite stories along the way. But I think when we think about these three waves of women's philanthropy that you've sort of chronicled for us, there are some underlying factors that we, as the how did you put it? The fund development professionals, because I think most of us here are fund development professionals, the fund development professionals who support them, the underlying factors is the pain level is so
Hmm.
intense that we have to create the change that we want to see. And it's almost as though we are revolutionaries with our philanthropy. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I mean, I think philanthropy, as we know, time, talent, treasure, ties, who we're connected to, our
Hmm.
testimony, those are all things we always talk about in philanthropy. But philanthropy is certainly giving
Hmm.
financially. It's volunteering, but I think advocacy is another key component to philanthropy. And not all women use that method in their philanthropy, but I think when we look at the big social changes that have happened in our country and in the world, it's because women have come together, and both from their volunteering and from
Hmm.
their engagement have raised their voices and said, we believe change needs to occur.
Hmm.
Uh, we believe that something needs to happen, and we feel empowered enough that collectively we can get together and make that change happen, whether it's through our money or through our activism.
Sure.
And obviously, we're in a time of great social change right now in our country and certainly in the world. So I think that's another piece that's going to add to women's engagement. We've certainly seen them in terms of how women have gotten more engaged in voting, particularly in the
Hmm.
last couple elections.
Right, right. And I think that we'll probably keep coming back to that concept of women giving collectively through their advocacy and their volunteer efforts, as well as through their dollars. But I wonder if we could um, if we could just spend a couple of minutes, because so much of this research is not just the data, but it's that qualitative research. It's the storytelling, it's what you've heard. And let's explore that a little bit further. What was the most notable story, or maybe some of the most notable themes that you came to when you were researching the book?
Yes, it's it was very interesting when I talked to women and interviewed them. Some of them I did in person, and then as I broadened the network, which to me was interesting, women just kept connecting me with other women. I mean, it was wonderful because they'd say, "Oh, you should talk to this person or that person." So I did a lot of interviews on Zoom and on the phone also. A couple themes when I talk to people. One, I always ask them, who taught you about philanthropy? And everybody had a mentor. Everybody could identify someone in their life that taught them about philanthropy. It may have been a parent, it may have been a, colleague at work, a
Mhm.
neighbor. And it wasn't always about money. It was about volunteering. It was about giving, but somebody influenced them and showed them how to be philanthropic.
Mhm.
So that was a common theme. I think women were very humble about their giving. They, didn't really want to boast about it. And particularly the women who came from very modest backgrounds really felt a responsibility to give back because now, later in their life, they had assets that
Mhm.
they felt they could do something with. It's interesting, the women who were married, when I talked to them about their giving as a couple, most of those women were very, very clear about they had their own agenda about
Yeah.
how they were going to give. It wasn't just my husband's going to make the decision. I mean, they had their
Mhm.
own ideas about
Mhm.
what to give, as well as, younger women were certainly very empowered to make their own decisions. And, I think the other thing that I heard is many times people don't know how to give. It's not the mechanics of writing the check. It's that, how do I make a decision that's a good, wise decision?
Yeah.
And so many people start out very transactionally with, I'll write the check for 10 or $25. And then over time, they begin to think more clearly about their values, what is important to them, and how strategically their philanthropy can have a bigger impact. Um, and I made a special effort to try and talk to people with a wide range. Obviously, I started with high net worth women. Some in more what I would call a modest range. But then there were stories that I got from, women who gave extremely modest amounts of,
Mhm.
of money, but for them, it was their philanthropy.
Significant. Yeah.
It was significant. It was very, very important.
Yeah.
So the two extremes I kind of saw where I had the privilege of interviewing Abigail Disney,
Mhm.
the Disney family, and I was surprised she answered her phone, but she did when I called her. And she was very clear about, I've always had extreme wealth, but frankly, I didn't know how to use it. No one taught me how to use my money effectively. And she really had to go through a learning process as an adult by
Mhm.
volunteering, getting engaged in organizations that taught her about causes so she could refine her mission and determine how she really wanted to do her philanthropy.
Right.
So, she was on the high end, and then the Women's Foundation in Minnesota related a story. I didn't talk directly to the woman about a woman who every month she'd send $1 or anywhere from $1 to $4 to the Women's Foundation.
Mhm.
And, the director called her and she said, why are you doing this? She said, well, I live in subsidized housing. I don't have a lot of money. I pay my bills, but at the end of the month, I'm giving this money to, somebody
Mhm.
else to help them with their life. So it was a big range.
Right. Right. And I actually, when I was a development director pre my consulting career, I had a donor who would tape coins and dollar bills inside an envelope and mail them in
Yeah,
every single week or every 2 weeks. And
right,
so, yeah,
right. And
absolutely.
I thought that, it was important because as fundraisers, a lot of times we end up focusing on, people who have the capacity to give big. And I
Mhm.
think one of the themes in women's philanthropy is because we like to work collectively,
Mhm.
um, you know, getting people engaged at all ranges is important too.
It's important. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so it seems like the themes that everybody was very humble, they felt a responsibility, there were things that were important to them with their own agendas. All of those themes seem to be consistent throughout most of the conversations that you had, from Abigail Disney down to the Women's Foundation donor in Minnesota, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly, different people had different experiences in terms of, how they got engaged, when they got engaged in philanthropy. I did ask them also questions because I was curious, do you think women give differently? And
Mhm.
almost everyone said yes. Um, we women give with their heart. Certainly,
Mhm.
they're very emotionally attached to things, but they also use their head. I mean, it's not
Sure.
purely an emotional decision. And but they talked about they want to be more engaged, I think, in the end result and the impact also. They're very concerned about what's my money doing? And I want to know. I don't want to just write the check. I really want to be engaged. Oh,
When we're thinking about our roles as fund development professionals, um, what can we do to help engage them? I know that you have a 6-step process that you talk about in the book. So if women give differently, and if, let's say, the establishment of philanthropy is designed around men, what do we
mhm.
do? And what's your sort of process to helping us as development professionals to engage with our women donors?
Yeah, the way I thought about the book is that I kind of looked at parallel process, what I would call a parallel process. One was how do we walk donors through this 6-step process of
Mhm.
engagement, but also how do we as fundraisers and in our organization walk through this process. And so uh, obviously developing awareness is one of the first things that we all do as fund development professionals. But awareness is us as professionals being aware of how women give, but also women being aware of what are the issues in the community. What do I care about?
Mhm.
And there are a couple questions. I have some assessments in the book about, what are you most concerned about? What do you worry about? What do you care about? What do you want to impact? And I think as professionals, when we engage in donors, and especially women, because women like to tell their stories. Um,
Okay.
in, in fact, when I did the interview, my husband would say, "You were on the phone a really long time," and I said, "Well, people want to tell their
People
story."
say things. Right, right.
Um, and having those conversations helps people bring their awareness to a different level. It's kind of like it hidden in them, and it brings it up. So I think as professionals, we have to take that time to really listen to more of the stories. And then, I think from an assessment standpoint, one of the things women don't do as well as we should is we're not as aware of our assets and our financial abilities.
Mm,
And one of the things I think we can do is, as a service to women, help connect them to more resources. Um, Women are kind of shy about their money. We have a complicated relationship with money sometimes. And so, for women to get engaged, they have to know what they have. They have to
mhm.
know what resources they can use. And that's really not only assessing what are your interests, but assessing your ability to
Right.
give, and
Mhm,
what are your choices. And then obviously, helping people align their passions with their assets
mhm,
is, a common theme. But I think for women, you can do that individually, but you can also do it collectively. You can also do it as a group.
mhm.
And one of the things we did with our Women United program is we didn't go to women and say, we think you should invest in this in the community. We asked them. We
Right.
said, we did focus groups. We said, what do you think is the most important issue in the community? And they selected healthcare for women.
Mm.
That was their choice, and so that's where their money went. And that's a very important component, I think, of women's philanthropy, is that we have to ask people who are going to be recipients to give us their ideas and their input also. It's not just us deciding. It's that co-relationship, that
So the
co-partnership.
philanthropists want to feel assured that the people who are the recipients of the philanthropy actually want and need it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And
Imagine
their
that.
and their idea may be totally different
Mhm.
than what we have in mind. So I think it's very important that we um, move away from these hierarchies,
Yeah.
and classes and categories, and really be in partnership with people
Mhm.
about what it is that they care about. And so, alignment, and then um, it's the ask. And sometimes we don't ask women. We, think, oh, I've got to go to the guy,
Mhm.
or I have a story in there about a woman who was married to a high powered executive. They gave a lot of money philanthropically. What the nonprofits didn't realize is that she was making the decisions, not him. And then they got a divorce.
Oh,
And um, she said, I was amazed none of the nonprofits we supported came to see me because they thought he had all the money. And it wasn't until a women's foundation asked her to be on a committee and eventually on the board that she said, somebody recognized I had my own assets after this. And she ended up being a legacy donor and giving him a planned gift. So,
sure,
yeah.
sure.
So, it's this. I think it's the stories. It's the connections, and it's asking. Don't be afraid to ask. Ask them to give, but ask them to be engaged at leadership levels too.
Absolutely. In meaningful ways.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly. So can you talk to us? So we've talked a little bit about um the stories that you've heard and the important themes from top to bottom and across the board, making sure that we're speaking to all people in the decision-making process, particularly women. Um, I wonder if we can talk a little bit more about the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion. We touched on it a bit as it relates to women want to make sure that the recipients of their philanthropy want and need the
Mhm.
contributions, but that's only one aspect of it. So how does DEIA factor into philanthropy, and especially not as recipients, but for our donors of
Mhm.
diverse backgrounds, younger donors, and the like?
Yes, I. I was very concerned about making sure diversity was part of the work that I was doing, and because many of the donors, frankly, that I started out with were white, wealthier women,
Yeah,
and I knew that wasn't going to be a good overall composite of philanthropy.
right.
And so I really sought out women of color specifically to talk to Melanie Brown, who's part of the Gates Foundation, African American woman. I had a great conversation with her about how she got engaged in philanthropy. Yolanda F. Johnson is president of Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to tap into what do they see in their networks. And I think what we find is that, like in any fundraising, we have subsets
Hmm.
of donors.
Sure.
And it's important to understand what are the characteristics and dynamics of each of those subsets so we can adapt and adjust our practices. Um, one of the things as I looked at donors of color is many of them don't identify with the typical leadership philanthropy groups, if you have leadership societies, because
Hmm.
sometimes they don't see many of themselves in those groups.
Hmm.
Uh, One of the things that we found is like women's giving circles.
Hmm.
The Asian Women's Giving Circle was a good example of how Asian women in New York came together and said, we're going to do a collective giving process, and then we're going to give to Asian women-based organizations to support them and help them. And
Mhm.
so, in a sense, it was this identification you have both from your ethnicity or your race and your gender that comes together to be very powerful in terms of how do I want to do my philanthropy, and do I
Mhm.
want to direct my philanthropy to uh, other people who are in my like group, who have similar interests.
Right.
Um, I talked to some people at Hispanics in Philanthropy, which is an
Mhm.
organization, and it wasn't just women focused, but their whole focus is helping Hispanic nonprofits be successful and businesses be successful. So their donors give specifically to that.
Right.
Um, so I tried to find different groups, and when I was doing the book, uh, really focused on women of color, Black women, Hispanic, and then Asian,
Mhm.
Pacific Asian women, and had a wonderful conversation with a woman out of Vietnam who was an Obama scholar, and she has started her own nonprofit to benefit environmental issues in Vietnam.
Very good.
And so, it was very specific to her country, and that's how she's using her philanthropy.
Right. Right. So it's people's giving habits, women's giving habits. As you say, there are characteristics of subsets among women that we need to be mindful of. And again, there's this theme of collective giving, potentially women's giving circles coming together um, to give to something that is uniquely important to them and their background. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. All
Right.
thinking about those things. Um, COVID-19, you touched on that a little bit during your book, which
Did.
is a little bit of a left hand or a right hand turn. But how did the pandemic impact the landscape of philanthropy and women's giving in particular? And how have we adapted and created new approaches to engage women?
Um, yeah, COVID interrupted a lot of things in addition to the publication of the book.
Yeah, yes, that too.
Yeah, I had a whole year of just waiting to see what was going to happen.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Hmm.
but yes, COVID was happening as the book was being put together, and one of the things I think all of us as fundraisers experienced is we had to change our practice.
Hmm.
We couldn't get together face to face with people like we love to do, and we always do, and so we had to go to this online process of how to talk to people and engage with people. And I think for women particularly, that's hard because we like to be together.
Yeah.
We like to connect, and most donors like that personal connection. One of the things I think that happened in many organizations is that because of COVID and because we had to go to more technology-based giving, in some ways there were some positives too. And so, like the Women's Foundation in my state, uh, every year would have this huge, huge luncheon, and then they do a purse auction, and then they do these other social sort of things. Well, they couldn't do any in person, so they did it all online. Actually, attendance increased because it was easier for people. They didn't have to travel. Some women who had the inability to get there, and I live in the Midwest most of the time. So in winter, you don't have to worry about travel.
No, right.
Right. So in some ways, it increased attendance. But the important thing was that those organizations made an attempt to then connect with women after that. So if they bought a gift at the auction, it was like, we'll deliver it personally and lay it on your doorstep. So
Hmm.
it was that personal touch in addition to the issue of we can't get together, so we have to get really creative about how we do this. The other thing I think that certainly COVID and other natural disasters that we've had, there's been a lot of giving
Hmm.
because of that globally. And one of the things we know about women is that they give smaller amounts to more organizations. They do give more online than men do. And they give more when there are disasters and crises. It's like hey, we got to jump in and help, and they do it.
Right.
And so they give more. So in a sense, it created an opportunity, I think, for women to get engaged in ways that they kind of like to get engaged and adapt. And it certainly appealed to the technology and and doing things that way appeal to our younger donors
Sure.
because that's their method of giving.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And you touched on this a little bit, the creativity that had to come through COVID and the like. Can you talk to us a little bit about what today's successful women's philanthropy programs are doing and what makes them so successful? Is it that we had to be away and we did the special personal touch? But, there are programs that have really long time sophisticated women's giving programs or organizations that do. What do they do? What are the key things that make them so successful?
Well, a couple things, and I think this transitions also and translates into organizations that want to start programs, is that uh, first of all, you have to understand your data. You have to understand your donor base and know the women that are connected with the organizations and their giving patterns. What did they
Mhm.
give to historically? How do they give? Um, what do they attend? All those sorts of things. And so you have to understand that first of all, I think, to get them engaged. And two of the nationally based programs that have had great success are obviously the breast cancer walks, the Pink Ribbon campaign, or the Go Red for Women Heart campaign.
Mhm.
The reason those uh, initiatives for women have been so successful is they tap into something that's very personal to women. It's a health issue. Secondly, there's a huge social element to it,
Mhm.
because they come together and do something on a social and activism level too. There's
Mhm.
an activism element to it. So those have been extremely successful programs. The University of Wisconsin, Martha Taylor and Sandra Shaw Hardy actually wrote a book about women's philanthropy 10 or 15 years ago. And one of the things they did at the University of Wisconsin is Martha, who is now retired but was at their foundation, they wanted to have a women's giving program to fund the School of Ecology. And she went to, which was, kind of the old uh, programs that women used to enroll in college.
Right.
And, you know, people said to her, women donors aren't going to give to that. And she asked women to give $100,000. Each got, I think, believe 100 women to do it. And the
Mhm.
School of Ecology is now named after a woman.
Yes.
So you have to have a champion too. That's
Mhm.
really important, I think, because sometimes uh, organizations want to start a women's program, but you need a champion and you also need your leadership to support it
Mhm.
100%. Because if it's just a kind of a one-off, oh, go try this, go do it, but it's not supported at the leadership level and you don't have somebody who's really championing it, it's probably not going to succeed. And you
Right.
need that person to be totally engaged with your women donors.
Yeah. So you need an internal champion leadership. You
Right.
need an external champion volunteer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's got to be personal. It's got to be social. It's got to have an element of maybe it has an element of activism. And I think that goes all the way back to those first, second, third waves of women's philanthropy, when there was a certain change that folks were trying to see come
Mhm.
to the fore. And so I think maybe one of the things that we can say is we as women want to see change for the better. We want to
Absolutely.
invest in the greater good. And if we can do it together, collectively,
Right.
following leaders who are deeply, deeply engaged, we'll go,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
We all
I
have our fist in the air for something different, right?
Yeah, I have a good friend in our community, and she's Muslim, and she connected me with her niece, who had started an on a social platform. This was a technology-based philanthropy program to fund programs in Iraq and a lot of foreign countries
Mhm.
for education for women. But she did it all online. A lot of younger donors got engaged in it. It was about how can we help women get an education, have access to economic opportunity. Um, and now it's a thriving organization.
Yeah.
And it was just a great example, I thought, of how somebody wanted to create change and took it upon themselves to do it, tapped into other women to support women.
Wonderful. That's a great example, and it brings all of those key components together. Now, I want to make sure we have enough time for questions from our audience. Before we do, I wonder if, and Adrienne is behind the scenes, she's gathering questions for those of you in the audience today, if you haven't had a chance yet to put your questions in, please do. But while we're getting ready to open up the Q&A, Lois, can you tell us a little bit about what you see as this bigger and bolder fourth wave of philanthropy that's coming?
Sure. Um, the In addition to that, intergenerational transfer of wealth, dual transfer of wealth, and the fact that we have more women who are not only inheriting but earning their wealth. The other thing that's happening, I think, is that we're seeing major foundations now have women leaders. Melinda Gates, obviously, excuse me, very involved in Gates Philanthropy as well as the Maverick Collective,
Mhm.
which is a kind of an innovative program she's doing with women donors. Warren Buffett's daughter is running his foundation.
Mhm.
I talked to Laura Kohler. I don't know if anyone knows the Kohler company. They make all the plumbing, products and
Fixtures,
stuff.
yep.
Yeah, and Laura Kohler is the granddaughter of the founder, and they're doing work in other countries in terms of hygiene for women.
Nice.
So, we have women moving into these leadership roles at family and major foundations.
Mhm.
We have more women of color who are moving into those roles.
Mhm.
Um, and I think because of that, you're going to start to see some shifts too in terms of where money is going and what are the priorities of some of these foundations. So, we kind of have it on multiple levels. We have, younger donors who are so excited and engaged
Mhm.
and want to give and want to start nonprofits themselves. We have the baby boomers who are our biggest pool of donors right now and will be replaced by the millennials. And then we have women who are moving into these leadership roles that
Mhm.
are going to start to shift, I think, some of philanthropy and how we've done it. Maybe it's more trust-based philanthropy. I don't know. Maybe it's just different priorities.
Mhm.
But things are going to continue to change.
Mhm.
I believe in social cycles a lot, and I think we're into a new social cycle here.
I think that's an interesting way to put it. We maybe are into a new social cycle, and it would be wonderful to see how our women philanthropists lead the next social cycle revolution. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Adrienne, do you want to hop on? I see we've got at least one, if not a couple of questions coming up here. What are we hearing from our people?
Well, we just got a question in which I think is great, a great question, because this has been my experience my entire fundraising life is here we go. Typically in a capital campaign, chairs, vice chairs are typically male. And how have you seen capital campaign shift to bringing more females into that leadership position?
Right, absolutely. It was my experience too at United Way. I'm actually kind of sorry to say that. It's true. You're right. I think traditional fundraising, we tend to look at lists of people, who's on a board, who's a community leader, who's part of your chamber of commerce, et cetera, et cetera. And then we go to those people because they're community leaders and we ask them to chair fundraising initiatives because we know they have connections and networks and influence. And many times those have been men. And even when I was at United Way, although we had some couples that chaired campaigns, we had husband and wife teams. We had never had two women as our campaign chairs or a single woman. And we finally did. The year I was leaving, it was like, thank goodness, it's about time.
Mm-hmm.
I think we do overlook women because I think we don't believe that they have as many networks or connections. And I think in some ways it's a false assumption because women do have networks. They might just have different networks.
Mhm.
And the one thing we're really good at is we are good at networking. In fact, we use a term in the book that's not my term called net weaving, where we weave people together rather than just connect the dots. We actually weave people into this tapestry together. And I think that's the power of women is we're very, very good at that. And so we need to rethink it. And it might take some time to transition, but I think we need to look deeper and then start going to those women and asking them to step up and lead, campaigns, endowments, etc.
I love that. I'd rather net weave than network. It sounds more
Yeah,
satisfying.
yeah, I know. It sounds so fun, doesn't it? Yeah. And think of
There's
the beautiful tapestry we could have as we bring in all different types of women, young and old, and colors and ethnicities and genders. And yes, yeah.
Absolutely. There's a follow-up to this because there was the comment about women being a little bit more humble. Do you find it more difficult to get them to say yes to take these leadership roles, or is it actually easier for them to say yes?
I think in terms of philanthropy in general, women take a little longer to make decisions because we like to really understand what we're doing and we take it seriously. So we want to know all the facts. And the other thing is we consult people more. I mean, we'll go ask for directions, right? We will ask for help. And so women take a little bit longer to make decisions, but sometimes I think as fundraisers, we need to uplift and help women believe that they have the confidence to do it. And so sometimes I think teaming them is a good idea. So they're not doing it alone, but they're doing it, so maybe it's a pair. And that's what we did at United Way is we had two women chair the campaign. They were co-chairs. So you're not doing it alone. You have a backup plan, and we have a committee behind you to help you. So and sometimes it's a matter of maybe engaging people at multiple levels to move them up into those leadership roles. Chairing the committee first, then maybe chairing the board. Then it's like, oh yeah, you can do the campaign, you can do that, and we're all here to help you.
Yes.
So yeah.
This is a
So
popular. Oh, go ahead.
no, I just think we need to be more encouraging and women are very flattered when they're asked and they might say, oh, I don't know if I can do it. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can.
Absolutely. I think this is a popular question because there's just add-on after add-on. We have a question about how do you bring, I would say, this mindset to the leaders to think about putting women in these leadership roles. It sounds like you kind of answered it a little bit with like putting them in those positions already because they can see them doing it. But do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, certainly I think engaging them at multiple levels. I think the other thing is getting to know them personally. I think also, so for your leadership to get to know those women on a more personal level. And then I think, our job as advocates sometimes is to carry that message forward about, well, did you know that this person is engaged in this group and this group and this group and this group? And, all of a sudden you've got 50 new people that could be potential donors to your campaign that you hadn't even thought about because she's in different networks than your traditional networks. And we want to tap those same old networks, certainly. But this is an expansive process that you could use. And so sometimes it's kind of a marrying, a blending of the old and the new, I think. And, you know, the other thing is trying to get some of those younger folks involved. So pairing them with a veteran.
Yeah.
So it might be a younger woman paired maybe with, you know, your traditional male, you know, exec in the community. But all of a sudden the campaign is seeing different faces. You know, it's not just him. It's, oh, now we have this 30-year-old woman who's a, you know, in the community and starting to be connected. She's the up and comer. So
Mm-hmm.
But
Thank you for
sometimes
that.
there are institutional barriers inside.
mhm.
And I think, Adrian, our next question, pardon me for leading the witness, but
Oh yeah. Go right ahead.
no, I will
Okay.
sometimes you go, but
Yeah, we have a question. There are some institutional barriers, such as having male leadership at the top who keeps repeatedly putting forward males for leadership positions. How do we maybe change the male mindset to look towards alternative leadership, specifically in women?
Yeah, it's it is a challenge. I agree. I mean, in the 100 years our United Way had been around, I was the first female exec they had had. So it is a challenge. You know, I think part of it is highlighting and introducing the good work that other women in the community are doing and making sure you're continuing to bring that information forward.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, one of the things in the book that I do talk about is we still have a tremendous imbalance in terms of leadership, male leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that I think again over time we're going to see shift, but you know sometimes it's not happening fast enough. Um, but I think you just have to keep pecking away at it. And you know the other thing that we all know in fundraising, it's who knows who. If you know someone in the community who can influence that CEO, who maybe has
Mm-hmm.
a more stereotypical traditional method, if you know someone in the community who he would respect, who also could be a proponent, it'll be more effective to have that peer talk to them, obviously, than maybe even coming up from the ranks, because we know peer-to-peer relationships are important, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to ask another question about how women are talking about philanthropy now, meaning how are they talking about it with their families? How are they passing it down from generation to generation? And do you find that to be different than maybe how males may have, or just maybe how society passes down
Mhm.
philanthropy?
Yeah, I think the whole movement around family philanthropy is, you know, it's a big topic right now, and many foundations are looking at that. In fact, they're hiring people to do specifically what we call family philanthropy. Um, I did a annual an endowment campaign one time that was an intergenerational campaign, and so it was the traditional loyal donors who were 60, but then their sons or daughters, and they gave a gift as a family. So old generation, new generation. And it was one of the most successful campaigns we ever did. But the whole intent was to get those younger people engaged and involved. So family philanthropy many times because families have donor advised funds and funds at foundations. It's about that family now trying to make a decision and teaching the younger generation about philanthropy. And I think what will be interesting is that over time, the children may not have the same priorities as what their parents did. And in fact, they may make different decisions about what it is that they're interested in.
Yep.
And I think in some ways that could be really good and really empowering because
Yes.
they see the world differently. So even though women really want to, you know, pass on that knowledge and information to their children and get them engaged and involved, I think it's also an opportunity for the next gen to maybe take things in a little different direction.
Absolutely. I think, do we have time for a couple
I
more?
think we have, I think we can wrap with the last couple of questions here.
Okay. So, you touched on this a little bit about maybe motivators behind women's philanthropy. Do you feel that women lean more into that trust-based philanthropy, that community-centric type of fundraising, or are you seeing them still being engaged through more of those like traditional forms? I thought it was really inspiring to hear the story about bringing the benefactors or the beneficiaries maybe of those dollars to speak to what they think is most important to the community. Do you find that to be a trend with women giving?
Well, I think there's a lot of different trends. I think women are very concerned about women. And so one of the things even in the book that I added is I have two chapters, one on impact and gender lens philanthropy, which is about how women want to give to organizations that support women. And so uh, like the Texas Women's Foundation specifically, all their investments are now being invested in companies that have good practices that support women, like so many women on their boards of directors and,
Mhm.
good human resource policies, those sorts of things, as well as women investing in other women-owned businesses. And how do we support women economically, not just through the social causes?
Mhm.
So I think women are being much broader now in terms of their philanthropy. They're looking at, there are lots of different ways I can do this. I can help a woman start a business as well as give to the homeless shelter. Um,
Mhm.
and what's most important to me, as well as, maybe health has been an issue for me, so I want to give to the healthcare organization.
Mhm.
So I think we have a broader range right now of possibilities for women, um, in terms of choices, and then also methods in terms of how they can give. So they can give $100 through a giving circle, or they could give a legacy gift of, an estate gift that nobody's going to probably see for another,
Mhm.
20 plus years. And so I think we just need to keep opening the door for
Yeah.
women to say, gee, there are so many ways to do this, and there's one that's right for you. We just have to find the one that's right for you. And you can do it.
And that's fun. I'll
Yeah,
take
it is
your
fun.
list, but that's exciting work to be able to have that much bandwidth of creativity to walk with the many different women that'll interact with our organization. So I've
Right.
enjoyed this. Liz, I'll let you.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed it a lot too, Lois. This has been a great conversation. And I think from the number of questions we've got and the feedback back and forth, I'm so, so grateful. So as we draw near to the conclusion, I'd like to extend my personal heartfelt thanks to you, Lois, and to everyone who has made this such a vibrant and enlightening conversation today. Throughout our time, we've explored the rich tapestry of women's philanthropy and delved into the transformative power it holds in shaping our communities and driving positive social change. Um, your book, Lois, is a wonderful guide to the exploration of the historical waves in women's philanthropy, as well as practical, how do I start a women's philanthropy program, and how to harness that collective generosity that women donors have to make such a lasting impact. So I simply want to say many, many thanks to you. It's been an enlightening conversation today. As we navigate this brave new world of potentially the fourth wave of women's philanthropy and examine the themes of equity, diversity, and inclusion, um, it's so important to make sure that all of our voices are heard and valued front and center along the way. So I hope, Lois, thank you again for your writing and your conversation. I hope that each one of you will take me up on the invitation to reflect on the insights and recommendations that we've heard here today, and consider how you play a role in advancing the fourth wave of women's philanthropy, whether it's amplifying underrepresented voices, championing innovative solutions, lending your support to causes you believe in, any number of ways, or creating internal change in your organization itself. once again, thank you for joining us. And together, let's build a future where generosity knows no bounds and every voice has the opportunity to be heard. Thanks again. Join us for our next On Giving, incisive commentary and analysis at the intersection of philanthropy and the greater good on Tuesday, April 16th at 12 p.m. Until next time, go forth, do good work, and remember, philanthropy is a powerful force for good. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.